Time to get into Kapitel 13. So we're just going to do the entire chapter in one video for this case because it is a passive voice and it's a little hard to break it up into smaller units. So we're just going to do the whole passive in one video. It's all sort of one topic. So this is the introduction to the passive voice. This gives you an overview of all the different ways the passive voice can be used. So we'll go through these real quick and then we'll break down each of these as we go along. So let's consider these sentences. Das Buch wird geschrieben, which means the book is written or the book is being written. So wird geschrieben, it's a form of werden plus a past participle. And so you see the book isn't doing anything, the book is being written. So the book is receiving the action of writing. So the book is not the agent, the book is the recipient of that action. So that's present tense. The book is written right now or is being written right now, present tense. But you can also do it in the simple past. You can say, das Buch wurde geschrieben, the book was written or was being written. And so then we have wurde, which is the simple past of werden. You can also do it in the present perfect, which is the conversational past, the other past tense. Das Buch ist geschrieben worden. Now we have basically two past participles here and auxiliary ist. And so it's the book has been written or the book was written. So you see we're still dealing with the book as a subject, but it's receiving the action, not doing the action. Das Buch war schon geschrieben worden. The book had been written already. So we're in the past perfect, the extra past, and we have the book being written instead of doing the writing, as you would expect in an active sentence. And then das Buch wird geschrieben werden, the book will be written in the future. And then das Buch muss geschrieben werden with a modal verb. So the book must be written. So let's break down the passive voice. The passive is a voice, not a tense. So up until now, when we talk about different verbs, we're talking about tenses a lot of times. Present tense, past tense, future tense. And those are times. When is the verb happening? But the passive is not a tense, it's a voice. So that's why it can be used in all of these different tenses. It can happen in the present, in the future, in the past, whatever. But it's not about the time that the verb happens. It's about the relationship between the verb and the object. So the passive voice is the opposite of the active voice. The passive places the emphasis on the recipient of the verb's action rather than on the agent of the verb. So the active voice is the standard, a normal sentence you would recognize as the active voice. In the active voice, the subject does the action of the verb, and the direct object receives the action of the verb. So that's what we've been doing this whole time. That's what we learned subjects do. Subjects do the action of the verb. That's how you recognize a subject. But that only goes for the active voice. In the passive voice, the subject is actually receiving the action of the verb. So it's opposite. And of course, it can occur in many different verb tenses. So let's compare. Sie sieht mich. She sees me. Sie sieht mich. So who's doing the action? She is doing the action. And who's receiving the action? Mich. Me receiving the action. So mich is the recipient. And then sie is the agent, and that's an active sentence. But if we want to do passive, we're shifting the emphasis to be not on sie. We don't really care who does the seeing anymore. What's more important to us now is who is seen, who receives the seeing action. And so mich turns into ich. Mich is the direct object, but ich is the subject. So this verb has changed around to be in the passive voice, and in doing that, we are now able to change the direct object into the subject, and it changes the relationship between these two. So it doesn't need to be the subject doing the action anymore, it's actually the subject receiving the action. So observe how the direct object in the active sentence, mich, becomes the subject in the passive sentence. Mich becomes ich. And even though it has become the subject, it is still the recipient of the verb's action. So ich is still receiving that seeing action, even though it's a subject. So let's look at these two. Sie sieht mich, she sees me. Ich werde gesehen. I am seen by her, you could say, right? So in this example, the agent has disappeared. We have ich werde gesehen, I am seen. Who does the seeing? We have no idea. It doesn't say. You don't have to say. You can say if you want, but in a passive sentence, you don't have to say who the agent is. So it's common for the agent to disappear in a passive sentence, but it is still possible to name the agent if desired by using von plus dative, dative. So you could add in right here, ich werde von ihr gesehen, I am seen by her. And then we would still have all the same information as in the active sentence, but we've just shifted the emphasis to ich being the subject, and then von ihr, sie used to be the subject in the active sentence, and now it's been shifted into a prepositional phrase, von plus the dative. Ich werde von ihr gesehen. I am seen by her. Okay, so ich werde von ihr gesehen. I am seen by her. Von plus dative is used when the agent is a person, by her, right? But sometimes the agent is an inanimate object or a cause. So you can say, Berlin wird durch eine Mauer geteilt. And in that case, it's Berlin is divided by a wall. So durch typically means through. So through is like by means of, or those are the means, I guess, through which it happens, right? So Berlin wird durch eine Mauer geteilt is, you would still say by a wall, is wird plus the past participle makes the passive, and then durch eine Mauer, by a wall. So that's when it's an inanimate object or some sort of conceptual cause. But then if it's person, you want to say von. And then we can also use, there's one more option when it's sort of a tool or an instrument. You can say mit, and we do that in English as well with the word with. So we say, die Tür wird mit einem Schlüssel geöffnet. The door is opened with a key. So mit einem Schlüssel is literally just with a key in English. So if it's a tool or an instrument, you can also use mit einem Schlüssel. But imagine you don't even, it's optional to just leave that out. You could also say, die Tür wird geöffnet. The door is opened. And, you know, you just say it's a statement that the door is being opened by someone. It doesn't matter who. By someone or something. It doesn't matter who or what. So let's look at the way that these flip around. So, sie sieht mich, she sees me. Ich werde gesehen, I am seen. So when these are for direct objects, right? Sie sieht mich, that's a direct object. That's how they flip around. Direct object becomes the subject. But when the object is actually an indirect object, when we want to place the emphasis on an indirect object instead of a direct object, then it's a little different situation. So the dative case is maintained, but we still do the passive verb formation. So werde gesehen, that's passive verb formation, but ich has turned into the nominative, the subject. That's because this was an accusative already. So now let's look at something where we have an active sentence with a dative here, an indirect object that we want to then emphasize. So we'll put this to the front, and what we've done here with the previous one, where this was a direct object, we put it to the front and we put it in the nominative, right? That's how we got to ich. But with this one, because it's dative, it's just the rule that you put it to the front and you keep it in the dative. You don't make it to the nominative. So, man gibt mir Geld, someone gives me money, me meaning the indirect object in the accusative. And then we want to be in the passive now. So we take the mir and we put it to the front, and you would think if it were the same construction that it would turn into ich, but it doesn't turn into ich. It just stays mir. And then we are changing our verbs to be in the passive. So like gibt is very different from wird gegeben, right? So gibt is just normal present tense, active, and then wird gegeben is the passive. So the verbs are now passive, but this is still going to be in the dative, mir. But then when you translate it, it does need to be I. It does need to go into the subject case in English, I. So if we were going to translate this more directly, it would be, to me, money is given. So it would be more like, to me. Money is given to me. So it's just it's a different way to deal with it based on whether it's a direct object or indirect object. Yeah, to me is given money, or to me money is given. Yeah. So we have that was when the verb was that was when we had an indirect object. Mir, that's an indirect object. It's in the dative, but we can also have the dative happening when we have these verbs that take dative objects, and they were helfen, danken, sprechen, gefallen, gehören. There's this list of verbs that you might think would take direct objects, but actually take dative objects. So when that happens, the dative case is also maintained, and the passive is seen in the verb form. So, sie hilft mir, she helps me, and then mir wird geholfen, I am helped. You could say to me is provided help. That would be the super literal translation, but I am helped is really the good translation. And so you see mir goes to the front, and then we've changed these verbs around, and it really looks quite different. And we don't change mir to ich. It just stays mir, because that's what happens with the dative as opposed to an accusative situation. Okay, so all of that was just showing you the usage, like how and in what context it shows up, and that sort of usage. But then we need to actually look at how to form these verbs, right? So how you make the passive is you take werden in your desired verb tense, in the time you want, past, present, future, whatever, and then you add the past participle at the end of the clause. So it's a combination of werden plus your past participle. And so this is often confused with the future. We just did the future not too long ago, and we saw that the future is a combination of werden plus the infinitive at the end of the sentence. So werden plus infinitive is the future, but werden plus past participle is a passive. So they both use werden, but you'll know which one it is based on whether you got an infinitive after it or a past participle after it. So what we have here is ich werde gesehen, which is passive, I am seen. But imagine if it were ich werde sehen, just sehen right here, that would be I will see, infinitive. So, ich werde gesehen, I am seen, in the present. Ich wurde gesehen, I was seen. And then the perfect, ich bin gesehen worden, I was seen, or I have been seen. The future, ich werde gesehen werden, I will be seen. So this werden is for the future, and this werden is for the passive. Since they both use it, one of them is indicating the future, and one of them is indicating the passive. And then so these two go together. This werden plus the past participle make the passive, and then this one indicates the future. And then present with a modal, so we have ich kann gesehen werden, I can be seen. So it's like I can be seen. Werden is kind of the equivalent of be in this case. And then we can do the simple past with a modal as well. Ich konnte gesehen werden, I was able to be seen, or I could be seen. Yeah, so you see what's happening with werden is we're just changing werden to all of the different verb tenses you can do werden with. So ich werde is present tense, I become, and ich wurde is I became, and ich werde werden is I will become, right? So you have to know how to conjugate werden in all of these different verb tenses, and then once you know how to do that, then you just stick the past participle along with it, and that's how you're going to make the passive. So it takes quite a lot of practice because there's a lot going on, but we just keep practicing. The perfect has a little bit of a weird thing going on when you do it in the perfect. So we just saw with the perfect, which is the conversational past, Ich bin gesehen worden. That's how you say I was seen or I have been seen. So what's happening is we look at sehen, right? We want to get the past participle of sehen, which is gesehen. That's easy enough, right? And we note that sehen would normally use haben as its auxiliary, as its helping verb in the perfect. So you would say, ich habe gesehen, I have seen. But in the passive, we're not going to, this helping verb doesn't really matter anymore. Werden is now our helping verb, not sehen. And werden doesn't take haben in the perfect. It takes sein in the perfect. So we'll just look at a normal sentence in the perfect that uses werden as its main verb. You would say, ich bin 21 geworden, which means I became 21 or I have become 21. So geworden is our past participle for werden, and it's ich bin geworden, I am become. It uses sein and not werden. So that's important, or it uses sein and not haben, so that's important to note. So what's happening here is that we're now using werden as our operative verb, and it uses sein as the auxiliary helping verb in the perfect. So we have ich bin 21 geworden, I became or I have become 21. So this is an active sentence. Ich bin geworden is the way you use the perfect for active voice when your main verb is werden. And then we're going to try and flip it around and use the passive, but unexpectedly, this past participle it changes. This is the only case where this happened. Otherwise, all the past participles are the same. So, ich bin gesehen worden is I was seen or I have been seen. So you see the difference between geworden and worden. It just loses the GE. And worden is only used in this passive construction. It's not a word that would occur anywhere else. It's single use for the passive, right? So ich bin gesehen worden is I have been seen. If this were going to like follow the rules, it would say ich bin gesehen geworden. I have been seen, right? But because the perfect requires a past participle. Ich bin 21 geworden. That requires a past participle if you're going to make the perfect. But also, if you're going to make the passive, we also need a past participle, right? It's werden plus a past participle. So we have these two verb tenses we're trying to put together, and they both want a past participle to be made. So it would be ich bin gesehen geworden. But it's just too much, and speakers throughout the centuries decided that they didn't want to do that. And so it is now gesehen worden. So the past participle that belongs to the passive is retained, gesehen. But the perfect participle is shortened to worden. So it's a little bit, it takes a little bit to wrap your mind around it, but hopefully it will become more clear as you practice it more. So, die Fenster werden morgen geputzt. This is, we've conjugated werden, and we have a past participle, and werden is in the present tense. So we end up with the windows are cleaned, geputzt, every morning. So it's like the windows are every morning cleaned at the end. So this is just a present tense. We've got conjugated werden in the present tense plus the past participle. This is a pretty simple one. The windows are cleaned every morning. And then, what if we want to do the past tense? Die Fenster wurden jeden Morgen geputzt. We've conjugated our werden again, but now werden is conjugated in the simple past. Wurde is how you get to the simple past. And then because die Fenster is plural, it also has this N ending. So when we get our simple past conjugated werden plus a participle, that means we're now in our past, simple past of the passive as well. The windows were cleaned every morning. Were cleaned. So then we have these ones. Die Arbeiter werden sehr wenig bezahlt. So conjugated werden in the present tense. That's easy enough. We have werden. It's like they are paid very little. The workers are paid very little, present tense. But if we want to put it in the simple past, all we have to do is change the werden to wurden, and then we have the workers were paid very little. Yeah. So werden, and then the infinitive, or then the past participle always at the end there. Okay, let's try present. Die Arbeiter werden sehr wenig bezahlt. The workers are paid very little. So you see how the workers are receiving the action of being paid. They're not doing the action of being paid. So that's why it's passive, obviously. We don't know who is doing the paying. Like you could add in die Arbeiter werden von den Arbeitgebern sehr wenig bezahlt. So it would be the workers are paid by the employers very little. But that's optional, of course. The emphasis is not on who pays, but who is being paid. So present tense, werden bezahlt, werden in the present tense plus past participle. And then we have die Arbeiter wurden sehr wenig bezahlt. Now we've changed werden into its simple past, makes the whole thing simple past. Simple past plus past participle. Now let's try the perfect. This is the weirdest one, right? Die Arbeiter sind sehr wenig bezahlt worden, which is the workers, you could translate the same, were paid very little. I guess the workers have been paid very little would be another way that would look more like this, have been paid. But the meaning is the same between these two past tenses. So, yeah, sind sehr wenig bezahlt is then the past participle, and worden is kind of like a past participle, but it's a weird special past participle that's only used in the passive. So it also means they were paid very little. And then, yeah, have been paid very little, you could also say. Die Arbeiter werden sehr wenig bezahlt. Werden, now we're in the future. The workers will be paid very little. So this werden in the normal verb position is making the future happen. And then this werden at the end, these two sort of go together, and then this werden is making the passive happen. And then, of course, in conjunction with this past participle that's making the passive happen. The workers will be paid very little. And then we have die Arbeiter können sehr wenig bezahlt werden, present with modal verb. The workers can be paid very little. So can, and then here's the whole passive happening over here. Werden plus past participle makes that passive happen over here. Can be paid very little. And then we can do also, all we have to do to make the simple past with the modal is just change the modal verb from the present to the simple past. So everything else is the same. We just change können to konnten, which is just how you get from the present to the simple past in a modal verb. So the workers could be paid very little, as in they were able to be paid very little. So that is the basic rundown of what we have for the passive that looks very much like English. And then there's a few other things you can do with the passive in German that we wouldn't use in English. So it's very versatile. You can do things with the passive in German that you cannot in English. So for example, in English you need a transitive verb, a verb that can take an object in order to make a passive. So not all verbs can take objects, right? When you say I go direct object. I go a park. You can't go a park. You have to go to a park, right? Go is intransitive. You can't add a direct object. But it, like read is transitive. I read a book. You can add a direct object. It's fine, right? In English, we can only make passives out of verbs that can take direct objects. But in German, it doesn't matter. You can make passives out of intransitive verbs. So we had these before. Sie sieht mich, ich werde gesehen, which is of course just she sees me, I am seen. it's transitive. We have a direct object. So, but let's look at a different one, like wir laufen zum Markt, we walk to the market. So we walk, and then we get a prepositional phrase. You can't add a direct object to walk like this. You can, it doesn't take one, right? And so when you have something like es wird zum Markt gelaufen, which is a totally real and pretty common construction in German, and if you translated it literally, you would think, okay, this is passive, and this es means it, so it is walked to the market, which is not very, which I don't think an English speaker would understand if you said it that way, right? So but in German, es wird zum Markt gelaufen is a totally acceptable and understandable sentence. So S is, see how S has appeared out of nowhere? Because via has disappeared. We don't care who the agent is anymore. So that's normal in the passive for the via to disappear. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes when the real subject disappears, we get a dummy subject. We get the S. And so that's why it would be something like, it is walked to the market, or has been walked to the market. To the market has been walked. To the market has been walked, obviously, right? So we have some more examples of these. This is kind of a classic example. Man tanzt, which is people are dancing, they are dancing. And then es wird getanzt is a very common type of construction, and you would just translate it as it is dance, but like, really, what does that even mean? So you could also say, let's look at these, man tanzt hier, which would be people are dancing here, they are dancing here, and then hier wird getanzt, here it is danced. I don't think we would say it quite like that in English, right? So we have to think of some alternate constructions sometimes. You can either change it into the active or just think of another way to say it. So man tanzt, people are dancing, one is dancing, I guess. And then the passive would be es wird getanzt, and it's not, it is dance, it's not a good translation, so you could say dancing is done here, or there is dancing here. Still doesn't sound the most natural, but it's just, the language shapes the way that you talk about things, so it's sometimes you're just never going to make it sound exactly natural because it's another language, and people just use different approaches to talk about things. So, man raucht hier is, of course, people smoke here, or someone smokes here, doesn't matter who, but it's still active. But then, in the passive, you can do hier wird geraucht, here is smoked, or here it is smoked. It doesn't matter who, it's just the fact that smoking is happening. So you can say smoking is done here, smoking is happening here, or there is smoking here. So those sound a little better, but neither of them sound as natural as hier wird geraucht. Hier wird geraucht sounds like a totally everyday, unremarkable sentence in German. So we have some examples of some active sentences turned into passive sentences. So these are actives right here. Chopin komponierte die Sonate Nummer 1 im Jahre 1828. Lang Lang spielt die Sonate heute Abend. So Chopin komponierte, that's an active verb, right? So who's doing the composing? Of course, the subject is doing the composing. And then, so that's fine. And this sentence is also active. Spielt die Sonate heute Abend. We also have the agent doing the action, the playing. So these are normal active sentences. But we'll switch them over to passive, and we'll say the objects are recipients of action, but now they've been changed into the subjects. So they are the subjects, but they're still receiving the action. So die Sonate Nummer 1 wurde 1828 komponiert. The sonata number 1 was composed in 1828. The in disappeared. They don't use the in right here in German, but in English we do. So it's like saying heute. It's like any other adverb of time. You don't say in today, you just say today. Imagine if you said, the sonata number 1 was composed today. You don't need a preposition, so that's why it doesn't do it. Okay, so was composed. And we just have the simple past of werden plus the past participle. And then this next one's going to be in the present passive. Die Sonate wird heute Abend von Lang Lang gespielt. So now we've got our present tense werden and the past participle. And then you see how now the direct object from before, die Sonate, has now become the subject here. Okay, so we had the von was here just like before. The von was retained here, but you wouldn't have to if you didn't want to mention it. You could just say, die Sonate wird heute Abend gespielt, which just would be, the sonata is being played tonight. Yeah, or this evening. So, yeah, if you do see the agent being mentioned, then it sounds sometimes better to just translate it in the active, because in English, passive sentences are regarded as clunky or awkward, or like if you're typing on Microsoft Word and you put in a passive sentence, then Microsoft Word will try to correct you. So that passive sentences have a bad reputation in English, but they don't in German. It's totally sounds great, and nobody thinks it's clunky. Nobody would try to correct you for using a passive voice sentence in German. But when you're translating it into English, sometimes it just sounds better to keep it in the active. So you just make the call there, especially if the agent is there. If the agent isn't there, then of course don't. But if the agent is there, then you might want to just make it active. So then you can convey the sentence actively using an unqualified subject, such as people or someone, if you don't have an agent. This one is a good example of the same thing of like, hier wird geraucht, right? Im stillen Winkel der Kirche wird sanft gebetet. In the quiet corner of the church is quietly prayed. It is quietly prayed or is gently. Sanft is more like gently, is prayed gently or quietly, I guess. So it's like it is being prayed in the corner of the church, but that doesn't really sound good in English. So you just say someone. We have this image in our head of someone over there praying quietly, but you can't see them. They're far away. It doesn't matter who. It's more that you can see the praying happening, but it doesn't matter who. So someone's a nice translation for this type of sentence. And then, since the passive voice is more common in German than in English, which tends to use the general subjects we, you, they in the place of a passive voice. So we have, for example, hier wird Deutsch gesprochen. It really means here German is spoken, but we speak German here. Sounds quite good and expresses a very similar idea. Deutsch wird auch in Österreich gesprochen. They speak German in Austria too. Is all, yeah. But German is also spoken in Austria, so having this in the passive in English, German is spoken in Austria as well, I think. Sounds fine in English. So they speak German in Austria too, or German is also spoken in Austria. Yeah. So then we have some more examples of the werden. Yeah, so I had a whole list of these before, but here they are summarized in the book. So, wird besucht, he is being visited. Sie werden besucht. Yeah, so you have to, of course, know how to conjugate werden for the tense that you want, and of course for to match the subject, whatever the subject is. So wird versus werden. Es wurde zerstört, it was destroyed, and then sie wurden zerstört, they were being destroyed. So you got to make sure that always matches whatever the subject is. And then die byzantinische Kirche wird jedes Jahr von Touristen aus aller Welt besucht. Tourists from all over the world visit the Byzantine church. every year. Yeah, so this one is, it's passive in the German version, but the translator has decided to make it active again. So von Touristen, literally it says, the Byzantine Church is visited every year by tourists from the whole world, which I think sounds fine. But if you think your reader doesn't want to read passive, then of course make it active. Viele Häuser wurden durch das Erdbeben zerstört. Many houses were destroyed by the earthquake. And then they also give the passive version, which is closer to what we have here. The earthquake. So we have the passive version first and then the active. So many houses, viele Häuser, wurden zerstört, were destroyed, and then durch das Erdbeben, by the earthquake. So that's the passive one. And then the active one, the earthquake destroyed many houses, either one. And then if the person or agent that causes the action is mentioned in a passive sentence, it follows von or durch, which are both by, which we talked about earlier. And then, of course, you can change it to an active verb. And then the action is, in fact, taking place. And be careful not to confuse it with the passive that denotes. We had this not too long ago in chapter 10. We can just look at these examples to see the difference. This is the passive voice we've been talking about this whole chapter, this video from this chapter. So passive, das Haus wird renoviert. The house is being renovated. The action is in process. So we've got werden plus the past participle. But you can also just use that past participle as an adjective. And then you say, das Haus ist renoviert. It's completed, and it's not really a compound verb tense at all, or it's not really the ist is just being it just means is. It's on its own. It's not connected to the past participle. The past participle is just an adjective. So you could say, das Haus ist blau. The house is blue. Or you could say, das Haus ist renoviert. The house is renovated. And in both cases, you just have subject, verb, adjective. So even though they kind of look similar, these two verbs together form the passive. And here we just have a verb and an adjective. So it's a different type of situation going on, and the meaning is slightly different. Okay, so now let's look at some more tenses, and this is, of course, the strangest one, the present perfect. So we have es ist besprochen worden, it has been discussed, or it was discussed. And then sie sind besprochen worden, they have been discussed. So worden is, of course, that strange one that you only get in the passive present perfect. And then we have im Kapitel 12 ist das Futur eingehend besprochen worden. The future tense has been discussed thoroughly in chapter 12. So it's like has been discussed. Yeah. So it's pretty tricky, but the easier way to say this is to just do the simple past instead. And so in speech, probably the simple past is more common. And so if you want to use these in real life, I would suggest using the simple past, which I think we had several examples before the simple past. I think that was before. But all you would have here is in the second position, you would have wurde and then just the past participle at the end. So it would be like im Kapitel 12 wurde das Futur eingehend besprochen, and that's it. Yeah. So then the past perfect is going to be the same as the present perfect, except for instead of the present tense of ist, you're just going to have the war instead. So had been discussed. Es war besprochen worden. It had been discussed. Sie waren besprochen worden. They had been discussed. Ja, das Futur war in den frühen Kapiteln nicht besprochen worden. The future tenses hadn't been discussed in the earlier chapters. So I think with these, the best way is to have your chart. So at the first slide of this PowerPoint, And then there were a couple other slides throughout with examples of all the different tenses. And then when you realize, when you're trying to translate a sentence and when you realize you're dealing with a passive, it's just, I think it's easiest at first to just compare it to the list of the tenses you have and figure out which one it matches up with. That way you can be sure that you're getting the right one. But it takes a lot of practice. Okay, so we have the future. Die Preise werden erhöht werden. The prices will be raised, and so this will makes the future, and then this werden plus the past participle makes the passive, will be raised. And then die Soldaten werden in den Sudan geschickt werden. The soldiers will be sent to Sudan. So here's the future, werden, meaning will, and then here's the passive happening at the end, will be sent. So when you first encounter werden, check its use. Both cases above, you are dealing with werden plus present passive infinitive. So you've got the passive happening here, right? Werden plus another passive. That means it's a future plus the passive. It's also possible in rare situations to find the future perfect passive, which consists of werden plus past passive infinitive. This is like getting really, really technical. So, das Thema wird in einem älteren Buch behandelt worden sein. The topic will have been treated in an older book. Yeah, you have to dig pretty deep to find a sentence like this, but it can happen. So, will have been treated, as in will have been handled, or addressed is another good translation for that. So, the topic will have been addressed in an older book. Will have been addressed or treated. Yeah. The most common use of this construction expresses probability in the past. So you can say werden plus the past passive infinitive, and then the wohl, like we were talking about not too long ago. Das Buch wird wohl schon besprochen worden sein. Oh man, that is a beautiful German sentence. The book has probably already been discussed. Wird wohl schon besprochen worden sein. Yeah, you would hardly ever hear that in real life. But if someone said that in real life, they would be a scholar. Okay, so we have modals. We had a couple modals already, but the modals, basically all you have to do is have the modal in the second position, the normal position. Die neuen Strukturen, that's the subject. Then normal position, modal verb, conjugated to match the subject. And then maybe we want to name the agent, maybe not. And then we need the past participle second to last, and then werden in the infinitive all the way last. The new structures have to be learned. So these three verbs, müssen gelernt werden, are the equivalent of have to be learned. In English, we put all three of these verbs together. And then in German, of course, when you have a modal verb, you got the modal verb in its normal position. And then normally you would put the infinitive to the last, but now we got two verbs happening at the end. So we do the past participle and the infinitive at the end. And of course, you could make it active if it sounds better. The students have to learn the new structures. Die früheren Strukturen müssen oft wiederholt werden. The earlier structures have to be reviewed often. So the earlier structures have to be reviewed often. So past participle, then werden infinitive. Die nächsten Strukturen werden auch gelernt werden müssen. Okay, so now we have a modal verb and the future. So this werden is the future, will. And then we have to be learned. We still have three verbs to do at the end. So the modal verb goes to the very end, werden second to last, and then gelernt third to last. Yeah. So it's a lot of verbs, but the more practice you get, the more you will just be able to pick out which is which and be able to translate them. So we have a few slides for you to practice the passive, and then the end of chapter exercises for Kapitel 13, which contain more practice with the passive. So here we have some passives. This one's present, this one's simple past, simple past. Here's one in the perfect. And then more simple past and perfect. Yeah, so it's a mix, but they're fairly straightforward, these ones. And then we have some that are a little less straightforward, some that you might have to rewrite a little bit to make sound natural in English. And then we have all of these from the end of this chapter. So, viel Glück, lots of luck with your new passive voice, and I hope you do well, and I will see you in the next video, and of course I will see you on Zoom as usual. Vielen Dank, tschüss, auf Wiedersehen.